Our agenda for today is to review the proposed program, the project purpose and need, discuss the project alternatives, provide an overview of the environmental assessment, and discuss and describe environmental justice considerations. We'll take a few moments to talk about the potential project effects and benefits, and then have a public comment session. So how did we get here? There's been a decade of congestion. Congestion in New York City has consistently ranked among the worst in the United States. Local bus speeds in Manhattan are on average 7% slower than citywide speeds. Between 2010 and 2018, travel speeds decreased by 23% in Manhattan's Central Business District, or CBD. And during that same period, multiple studies and panels explored how best to address congestion, including the 2008 New York City Traffic Congestion Mitigation Commission and the 2018 Fix New York City Advisory Panel. Many of them came back with the same concept of congestion pricing. There is also a need for sustainable funding source for transit. Prior to the pandemic, nearly 75% of trips into the Manhattan Central Business District were made using transit. 95% of trips to the Manhattan Central Business District by low-income populations are made using transit. MTA's subway system is over 100 years old and must be repaired and modernized to meet the region's needs. And funding transit modernization would improve service and attract commuters back to the system, further reducing congestion. In April 2019, the New York State Legislature passed the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. If approved by the Federal Highway Administration, this act would entail vehicles entering or remaining in the Manhattan Central Business District be tolled. Net revenues would be used for public transportation capital projects, with 80% devoted to New York City Transit, 10% to the Long Island Railroad, and 10% to Metro North. The toll rates will be determined by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, or TBTA Board, informed by recommendations of the Traffic Mobility Review Board and after a public hearing. There are mandatory post-implementation reporting and evaluation requirements. To make sure everyone understands the area about which we're speaking, Central Business District tolling program boundary is south of and inclusive of 60th Street. Tolls would not apply to vehicles that are solely using the FDR Drive, Route 9A West Side Highway, including connections to the Hugh L. Carey Tunnel, or the Battery Park Underpass connecting the FDR Drive and Route 9A. The Federal Highway Administration will serve as the federal lead agency for the environmental review. They are responsible for reviewing all of our analyses to confirm that they are complete, and they will also issue the environmental findings for the project. The Metropolitan Transportation Authority and its affiliate, the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, the New York State Department of Transportation, and the New York City Department of Transportation are serving as project sponsors. With respect to the project purpose and need, the project purpose is to reduce traffic congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District in a manner that will generate revenue for future transportation improvements, pursuant to acceptance into the FHWA's Value Pricing Pilot Program, or VPPP. The project would address the following needs: reduce vehicle congestion in the Manhattan Central Business District, and create a new local recurring funding source for MTA's capital projects. The following objectives further refine the project purpose. It would reduce daily vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, within the Manhattan Central Business District, reduce the number of vehicles entering the Manhattan Central Business District each day, create a funding source for capital improvements and generate sufficient annual net revenue to fund $15 billion for capital projects for the MTA Capital Program, and establish a tolling program consistent with the purposes underlying the New York State legislation entitled the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act. So how is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and the project linked? NEPA requires federal agencies to assess and consider the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making a decision. The project would be implemented through the Federal Highway Administration's VPPP. As a federal program, that VPPP, or Value Pricing Pilot Program, is subject to NEPA. Federal Highway Administration is the lead agency and has determined that an environmental assessment with extensive outreach is the appropriate level of environmental documentation for this project. There are two project alternatives. There's the no action. There would be no Central Business District tolling program, no comprehensive plan to reduce congestion in the Central Business District, and no identified transit capital revenue stream. And there is the build or act alternative, where we would build a Central Business District tolling program. There would be new tolling infrastructure and toll system equipment, implementation of a tolling program, which would have multiple scenarios in the environmental assessment to assess and identify the range of effects, positive or negative. And there would be creation of a new revenue stream for investment in subways, buses, and rail. A little more detail on the proposed Central Business District tolling program alternative. As noted earlier, tolls would be charged for vehicles entering Manhattan south of and inclusive of 60th Street. Passenger vehicles would be charged once per day, and there are exemptions required by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act for qualifying vehicles transporting persons with disabilities, qualifying authorized emergency vehicles. Central Business District residents with gross adjusted incomes below $60,000 would be eligible for a tax credit. And there would be a Traffic Mobility Review Board that would be tasked with recommending to the TBTA board the toll structure, including but not limited to a plan for credits, discounts, and/or exemptions. Recommendations will be informed by a traffic study and must take into account multiple criteria, including the ability to generate revenue required, the impact on traffic patterns and volumes, public safety, air quality, among others. With respect to the toll, the environmental assessment is going to assess a range of scenarios and will be informed by robust public outreach. Studying multiple scenarios ensures that we understand the full range of potential environmental effects, including but not limited to congestion reduction, that different toll rates may cause. Toll rates will differ in each scenario depending upon the time of day, how someone pays, and the inclusion and extent of any credits, discounts, and/or exemptions beyond the two mandated by the enabling state legislation. Importantly, all else being equal, the more credits, discounts, and/or exemptions that are given, the higher the toll must be in order to meet the project's purpose, needs, and objectives. The modeling is not complete, and a final determination of the toll rates will not be made in the environmental assessment. Indeed, the toll rates, as noted previously, will ultimately be set by a vote of the TBTA board after the environmental review process and after the Traffic Mobility Review Board makes its recommendations. So importantly, these numbers I am about to share are for informational purposes and subject to change. With that said, to give you at least a sense of the range of potential toll rates, we anticipate that the Easy Pass peak period toll for automobiles will range from roughly $9 on the lower end to $23 on the higher end if many credits, exemptions, and/or discounts are provided. The range of potential toll rates for automobiles using tolls by mail would be higher, roughly $14 to $35 for the peak period, again, depending upon scenario. Off-peak and overnight toll ranges may be lower, and tolls for trucks and other vehicle types would have different ranges. With respect to the study areas, the broad study area for the environmental assessment includes a region of 28 counties throughout New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. There will also be more refined local study areas, including the Central Business District as defined by the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act, in other words, 60th Street and inclusive and south, with those other areas excluded as we described earlier, and neighborhoods near the Central Business District boundary where the project could have social, economic, or environmental effects. In terms of the key topics of the environmental assessment, this is not the full list, but we wanted to at least give you some sense of the kinds of things we'll be studying. Among them, as you can see, regional transportation, which is obvious. We'll be looking at highways and local intersections, commuter rail, subways, and buses, parking and pedestrian and bicyclists. We'll also be looking at social and economic considerations and conditions. We'll be looking at the visual resources, air quality, noise, and environmental justice, among others. Environmental justice is an important consideration for the project. Given that over 51% of the population within our study area lives in environmental justice communities, we're going to spend some time walking you through the federal requirements to address environmental justice and some of the tools we'll be using to engage with environmental justice communities. The term environmental justice refers collectively to minority and low-income populations within a project study area. In 1994, President Clinton issued Executive Order 12898, which requires federal agencies to consider the effects of their actions on environmental justice communities. In subsequent years, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration have issued their own orders on environmental justice. Our environmental assessment must comply with all of these orders. The orders provide that Federal Highway Administration take the appropriate and necessary steps to identify and address disproportionately high and adverse effects of federal projects on the health or environment of minority and low-income populations to the greatest extent practicable and permitted by law. This slide shows the steps we'll be using in developing our environmental justice analysis. It is based on guidance developed by Federal Highway Administration and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. As you can see, we begin by identifying minority and low income or environmental justice populations and environmental justice communities. We engage in outreach with those communities, as you can see by the little picture on the right. We then determine whether the project would result in adverse effects on environmental justice populations or communities. We consider mitigations for those adverse effects of the project, as well as potentially offsetting benefits to the affected environmental justice populations. Again, there's outreach and engagement during that process. If the effects remain adverse after mitigation, we identify disproportionately high and adverse effects. If there are no disproportionately high and adverse effects, the evaluation is complete. If there are disproportionately high and adverse effects, we evaluate further mitigations or alternatives to avoid or reduce those effects. The Federal Highway Administration Environmental Justice Order provides specific definitions for minority and low-income populations. As you can see here, minority is defined by U.S. Department of Transportation and the Federal Highway Administration as a person who identifies as Black, Hispanic or Latino, Asian or Asian American, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, or individuals identified as some other race by the U.S. Census. Low income is defined by United States Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration as a person whose household income is at or below the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services poverty guidelines. For a family of 4, the 2018 U.S. Census Bureau poverty threshold was $25,750 for the study area. Based on the definitions in the previous slide, we have identified the environmental justice populations in our 28-county study area. As noted earlier, and as you can see in this table, over 51% of our study area population is considered minority, and over 12% is considered low income. I'll drill down on this data a little more in the next slide. This map shows the distribution in large concentrations of environmental justice populations throughout our study area. New York City has the highest concentration of minority and low-income population in our study area. Just under 70% of New York City's population, excluding the central business district, identifies as a member of a minority population, while over 18% are considered to be low income. The portions of New Jersey within our study area are comprised of roughly 47% minority populations, with 10% as low income. Roughly 37 to 40% of the population identifies as a minority population in each of the counties in the study area to the north of New York City, on Long Island, and in Connecticut, while the low-income population represents over 9%, about 6%, and over 10%, respectively. About 42% of the Manhattan Central Business District identifies as a minority population, while 13% are low income. Based on preliminary model results, 95% of low-income individuals travel to Manhattan Central Business District by transit, and 5% by vehicle in the morning peak period. When we consider the travel patterns for all commuters, low-income drivers account for under 4% of the total vehicle trips into the Manhattan Central Business District in the morning peak period, and low-income drivers represent less than 1% of the total trips into the Manhattan Central Business District in the morning peak period. We will continue to refine our data and assessment as we engage with members of environmental justice communities. In addition to the meetings like today, reviewing comments submitted on our website from email, by phone, and by mail, we'll be doing 2 other things to engage members of the environmental justice community. One is the Environmental Justice Technical Advisory Group that we'll be bringing together. This is a group of technical experts who have knowledge of environmental justice considerations and can share concerns drawn from throughout the study area. It will be comprised of community leaders, advocacy group representatives, and industry group representatives with specific interest in environmental justice considerations. They will help us identify concerns and mitigation if needed, and help to ensure information is circulated as widely as possible. This group is by invitation only, and the first meeting will convene in October 2021. Potential participants will be contacted in advance. A second group, an Environmental Justice Stakeholder Working Group, will also be brought together. This is a group of interested members of the communities throughout the study area who would like to participate, again, beyond participating in the webinars by email, phone, or mail. This group is comprised of interested members of the community, and the purpose is to share concerns and request discussion on particular issues as appropriate. You may suggest yourself or someone else by visiting our website to complete a form, or by contacting us at 646-252-7440. The first meeting of this group will convene in November of 2021. And again, once we have all the names and contact information, participants will be contacted in advance. We're now going to review some of the potential effects of the project. Importantly, these effects are dependent upon scenario. The next slide will highlight some of the potential benefits. We'll begin with effects where there would be new tolling infrastructure and tolling system equipment. These are effects that result from installation of tolling infrastructure and equipment, or from changes in traffic patterns in the Manhattan Central Business District. For example, this includes temporary disruptions from construction during installation of infrastructure and equipment. Construction will have a limited duration, but it will generate some temporary truck traffic, dust and emissions, and noise. These activities will be similar to typical utility work or roadway construction. Visual changes where new equipment will be installed could also take place. In general, the tolling infrastructure and equipment will appear like other existing streetlight poles and traffic control infrastructure. Near the Queens Midtown Tunnel and Hugh Carey Tunnel, there will be some traffic diversions on the highway system that could result in more than a nominal increase in traffic. Preliminary analysis suggests this change in traffic would not occur on local roadways and would not adversely impact air quality and noise in the neighborhoods where the highways are located. However, we will be looking more closely at the neighborhoods adjacent to both sides of the tunnels. Preliminary analysis shows that new transit passengers will be spread throughout the system and will not overcrowd any particular route or line. In addition, preliminary analysis does not predict many people driving to transit stations near the Central Business District to begin their transit trip. Based on the preliminary analysis, the shift to transit would not notably change access to transit services, or pedestrian circulation near transit stations and hubs. With respect to changes in traffic in neighborhoods near the Manhattan Central Business District, in certain scenarios, traffic may divert from the East River bridges to the Queens Midtown Tunnel and Hugh Carey Tunnel. We will examine whether increases in traffic volumes would have the potential to affect neighborhoods near the two tunnels in Red Hook, Carroll Gardens, and Long Island City, where environmental justice populations are located. In terms of traffic that diverts around the Manhattan Central Business District to avoid tolls, some drivers currently travel through Manhattan, although their destination is elsewhere. For example, you may travel from New Jersey to Brooklyn or the Bronx by going through Manhattan. Preliminary modeling shows some of these drivers will change routes to avoid or pay lower tolls, with traffic potentially increasing on the Staten Island Expressway and parts of I-95 like the Cross Bronx Expressway. We will look closely at the extent of increases in parts of Staten Island, Brooklyn, Upper Manhattan, and the Bronx, and whether they could result in notable changes in traffic, air quality, or noise, as neighborhoods adjacent to many of these routes have been identified as environmental justice communities. With respect to tolls on low-income drivers coming to the Manhattan Central Business District from throughout the region, a direct effect of the project on residents of the Manhattan Central Business District who are part of an environmental justice population is that they will be charged a toll to drive into the Central Business District. However, the MTA Reform and Traffic Mobility Act provides a tax credit for those individuals whose primary residence is within the Central Business District and whose New York adjusted gross income is less than $60,000 per year. Preliminary analysis has found that fewer than 1% of the Manhattan CBD's commuters are low-income individuals who drive, but nonetheless, we are assessing the economic effects of the additional costs for these commuters. Finally, in terms of tolls on the taxi or for hire vehicle industry, which has a high proportion of workers who identify as minority, as defined by United States Department of Transportation guidance, industry data shows that a high percentage of taxi and for hire vehicle drivers identify as minority populations. Once there is a new toll for entering the Manhattan Central Business District, our model shows that some passengers would no longer choose to use taxis and for hire vehicles, since it would increase the cost of their trip. We will examine the effect of the project on the taxi and for hire vehicle industry and the resultant effect on minority drivers. With respect to benefits, if the program is approved, we anticipate the project would reduce vehicular traffic in and near the Manhattan Central Business District. Overall, and depending upon scenario, our modeling predicts a 15 to 20% reduction in traffic volumes that would enter the Manhattan Central Business District each day. As a result, we anticipate improvements in air quality and traffic noise as there would be fewer vehicles. And we anticipate improvements in travel times within the Manhattan Central Business District as there would be less congestion. The program would also provide additional funds for subways, trains, and buses, funding the MTA Capital Program, which includes many projects to improve and expand subway, bus, and commuter rail service. This would benefit MTA's transit commuters, including environmental justice populations. As we mentioned in the previous slide, about 95% of low-income commuters use transit to reach the Manhattan Central Business District. I want to take just a moment to discuss or describe the anticipated NEPA schedule. We've already begun our outreach. That's what we're doing here today. And we anticipate that this outreach will continue through January of 2022, as we also prepare the NEPA environmental assessment. Between February 2022 and May 2022, 2022. There will be review with Federal Highway Administration of the document itself, and at the end of that period, the environmental assessment will be made available for public comment. Once the document is made available for public comment, there will be a public review period and a new comment period. That period will also include additional outreach related to toll rate ranges. Between that June 2022 date and December 2022, the work will be done to incorporate all of that information to make sure that the final outreach is done, and ultimately to have Federal Highway Administration make an environmental determination. If approved by Federal Highway Administration, future outreach and public hearings will be held as part of the Implementation and Traffic Mobility Review Board process during 2023. Here is the list of all the public outreach webinars we are holding. As had been noted in the distribution materials prior, you may attend any one of these or all of these as you would like. We also have the 3 environmental justice outreach meetings, webinars. Those will be occurring on October 7th, 12th, and 13th with slightly different focus areas. But again, as with the public outreach meetings, residents may attend any one of the webinars they would like to. In terms of our stakeholder working group meetings, we expect the first one in early November, the second one in late November, and then we expect a third one in June of 2022 once the environmental assessment has been released for public review. Thank you.